Okay, welcome to this video. We're going to discuss about some motivations or drivers on the energy discussion, especially on sustainable energy future. And then we'll talk about also the effect of greenhouse gases on climate change as well as on global warming. And we'll try to identify the various factors that affect the CO2 emissions, including those scenarios, the greenhouse gas emission scenarios, if we are going to do as business as usual scenario, or we are going to follow the limiting the global warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius of temperature increase. And also we'll try to see some of the international climate change agreements and a bit of discussion about this form of accords and agreements towards more controlled scenario of global warming. Let us discuss now the various motivations and drivers for energy discussions, and we're focusing more of sustainable energy discussions as well. The first one would be on fossil fuels are a finite resource. As I mentioned before, more than 80% of the world are provided by a fossil fuel energy source, and this fossil fuel is not forever. It doesn't really stay there forever. Of course, it can renew itself, but it needs a really long time for its formation. So that's why we say it's non-renewable, because the formation takes millions of years and we cannot reach that lifetime of a million years. So at this point, it's important that we need to search for some alternative resources or try to find out how to better use of these fossil fuels. So that's why we have a technology on carbon capture and sequestration, or perhaps making sure that fossil fuel use are not not as extensive as before. So you can slowly or not it so that it will not run out that fast. Secondly, we are also interested in security of energy or energy security supply. So basically, when you say energy security, it's basically saying that we don't have an interruption of the ability of our energy at an affordable price. So it means everybody can afford. It has maybe it has two aspects in the energy security. It can have a long-term aspect and a short-term aspect. So when you say a short-term aspect, it focuses on the ability of a country or any institution to provide the energy in a prompt way. It means that if there's a sudden demand, that country can possibly give the demand appropriately on time and on the demand that is needed. On in a more long-term security, energy security, it deals with investments in energy supply in line with your economic policy and development, and including the environmental needs of a nation. So we're trying to see that we are secure in energy without depending on other countries, other countries' supply. So we're looking at total independence. So, for example, one country is supplying you oil, and there's a problem with that country, and they cannot supply your oil, then if you are totally dependent on that oil in Australia, for example, then we will have a big problem with our transportation. So that's why we need our motivation is to be secured in energy supply. The third one would be that probably fossil fuels changes our climate, and it's not anymore a question if it's really affecting climate change, but it is evidence based now. And so, as we know, the contribution of human activities, anthropogenic activities, has resulted to enhance greenhouse gas emissions. And to add to that, we have also a population problem, because right now we're nearing the 8 million mark already. And so the more population we have, the more energy is needed, and we are also emitting a lot of greenhouse gases. So we can say that climate problem is actually an energy problem. So on ultimately, the main motivation for energy discussion is more especially on climate change, But of course, we are also looking at energy security and the finite resource of or finite supply of fossil fuels. So when we look at population growth and the consumption of energy, we can say that, as I mentioned before, there's exponential growth in population. And so it is very related to the way we consume energy as well and the resources that are available. So right now we are around 7.8 billion people at the present time. And this growing population also consume energy. The more people are born, the more people are on Earth, each person will consume our own energy. Of course, it's not equal to some parts of the world, but more or less we require energy to live. So when the population increases, the energy consumption also increases, and it exerts demand on energy resources to be scarcer. So we have more energy consumption. We need to increase the sources of our energy, right? So once we have scarce energy sources at this point, then we need to find new sources of energy. So we need to dig deeper. For example, we need to get more wood. Probably you need to mine some coals and dig deeper. For example, oil has to be drilled in more complex environments. So it makes everything harder now to extract. But then again, the need for that, the demand is increasing. So once we find our new resource now, so once we find new oil, we dig more coals, then it can provide more energy now. So once provision of energy increases, then most likely your population again will probably increase. And so once population increase is more or less a cycle. It's just going around and around, and it's just keep on increasing. And the more increase of the population, and not only people, animals, and all the living things, we're actually expanding the carrying capacity of our world or of Earth. And up to some time, the carrying capacity is the ability of Earth to indefinitely support the life on Earth will be quite big already. And so it will be at a point that it will reach its peak, that it cannot support anymore more than it could possibly be able to support. So this is the thing that is a big problem. It's also a motivation for us to talk about energy because it's a cycle. The consumption, the resources, and population is always increasing. So this is an example of population growth here, and it determines also our energy consumption forecast. So a bit of an example on people problem. So because this is one of the major issues of energy consumption, the more people you have, the higher the consumption will be. So for example, the people problem is actually based on a more exponential model. It's not always this case. The exponential model is not always this case because it really depends on time scale. So if you look at this graph here, this is population on this axis here, and this is the year, the date. So before, if you look at from this date of 10,000 BC, then you can see it's more linear and even more flat until such time in this area here. So it's not that very big increase of population. Then suddenly, from this part of time scale, it suddenly increased this much. So there's an exponential increase from this part. So exactly what happened here? And that's a question. So this part is where the industrial revolution take into account. So if the industrial revolution, the use of fossil fuel increased, we have more comforts in life and improvement in life, and then suddenly the population also increased. So if we want to have a bit of forecast about population, we can use this formula here. P sub t is this is the final population is equal to the initial population times e to raised to the rt. All right, in this case, this p sub t is a population at time t, especially this is the final population that you're trying to calculate. P sub o or 0 is the population at initial, that t equals 0 or time equals 0. So this is the initial population. And R is the rate of growth. And this is basically the rate of growth is the number of people being born per individual per year. All right. And T is a time scale. So usually is in years. So this is an important aspect here is the rate of growth. How does you compute or how do you compute the rate of growth? So the rate of growth is basically a function of the birth rate and the death rate, the immigration and the immigration. Okay, so these two, birth rate, of course, we know the number of people that is born on a yearly basis. The death rate is basically how many people died in a year. Immigration is how many people are actually going out of your country. And immigration is actually how many people are coming into the country. So it's just birth rate minus death rate plus coming in minus going out. All right. So this is how you compute for the rate of growth. So you can see from these four scenarios here in a world population growth, if we are considering, like for example, a rate of growth of 1.5, 2.1, or 2.6. So it really depends. So if you have some rapid fertility reduction, it means people, if you have more economy, is becoming busier in your life and you don't have really time for family, then your fertility reduction will be quite high. So it means you are not really, making new babies. So not many people are born. So the population will have a more stagnant trend. But then again, if you have it's a constant path is the way we are now, then we can have more exponential growth. And then we have also, depending on your rate of growth, you have a different trend here as well, and moderate fertility reduction. All right. So right now, especially for developed nations, the rate of growth are slowly getting low and lower because people are very stressed with their life. They're very stressed with getting a job and even doing the job that they're working. So the rate of growth are slowly declining. So let's have an example of the people problem. Is the people problem. So let's say there's this is the question here. Estimate the percent growth of the global population from the year 2010 to 2050 using the following assumptions. Crude birth of 20 per 1,000 people, crude death rate of 8 per 1,000 people, a population of around 6,892,000,000 or 6.892 times 10 to the 9 people. So it means or almost 7 billion people of initial population. So the question is to find the percent growth rate, all right? The percent growth. So the percent growth is basically how many people in terms of percentage have grown from 2010 to 2050. That's around 40 years of difference between the two. All right, so 2050 minus 2010 is 40 years. So based from our previous formula, the formula is P, final population, is equal to the initial population times e to the RT. And so that our time frame is T here. So the time frame is 2050 minus 2010 is 40 years. That's our T, right? But we don't know R. We know P sub 0. P sub 0 or P sub O is around 6.8 billion people. So what we need to do is find R here. So R is basically the birth rate minus the death rate plus immigration and immigration. Then we can say that the birth rate is 20 over 1,000, which is the birth rate, minus the death rate of 8 over 1,000 here. So that's the rate of growth. But we are not provided I and M. So we just cancel these two things here, terms here. So we have this minus this is equal to 0.012 or a birth rate or a rate of growth of 1.2%, which is pretty much very similar to the current global population growth rate or around 1.1%. Before we can have as high as 5%, 4 to 5%, but now it's going down and down because of the changes of the way we go with life. So now we have R here, so we can just input all the values in the original equation. So from this equation, we can say the initial population is 6.8 times 10 to the 9 times e raised to r times t. So r is 0.012 times 40 years. Then we get the final population in 2050 as 1.1 times 10 to the 10 people. Or we can say 11 billion people. All right? So from the initial one of 6.8, it becomes 11 billion in 2050. So how much exactly is the percent growth? So from here, the percent growth now is basically on the equation of final value minus initial value over, no, close parenthesis, over the initial value times 100%. So the final value is the value of 1.1 times 10 to the 10, which is this answer here, minus the initial value of 6.8 times 10 to the 9, over the initial value of same value of 6.8 times 10 to the 9, there should be 9 here, times 100. All right, so the answer would be around 62% growth in 40 years time. All right, so this example is just a very rough estimate. We never included that the total fertility rate here. Okay, this is just the rate of growth here, but we didn't include here the total fertility rate. And the fertility rate is important aspect because it's usually in a woman can have 2-3 children depending on the need or the choice of the woman. So it's the number of children a woman would have in her lifetime is dependent on is related to the total fertility rate. So if we include this one, it will be more complicated, but to have a rough estimate, you can just use this equation to get the rate of growth.